This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session number 86 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, everyone. I'm Gordon Brewer, and I'm so glad you've joined me for the podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome, and glad to have you with us. And take the time to subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. Boy, I am so excited for my guest today on this episode of the podcast. I've been waiting for to get this guest. He's been so gracious. He's a very busy guy, but I've got an author, Paul Jarvis, who is the author of Company of One, and you'll see a link for that book in the show summary, show notes. And it was a book that when I read it, I actually listened to it on Audible, that I was just thinking, oh, this strikes a chord. And you've heard me talk about the book here before on the podcast. And so I'm just so happy that Paul was gracious enough to join me out of his busy schedule. He's from Canada. He's up in Vancouver Island, he told me. So I've been listening to his podcast. Of One is the title of his podcast. And I would I'm going to probably embed in the show notes, or if you go to the show page for this episode, I'll have embedded there an episode of one of his podcasts that was I was listening to this morning that just really struck a chord for me in terms of just thinking about money and finance and how much money is enough and that sort of thing. And so we're going to get to the interview with Paul in just a moment. I wanted to also let you know about an upcoming episode of the podcast. I had mentioned last week being with my friend, Dr. David Hall, and David and I have been doing some collaboration on some things, particularly around just courses and teaching people about private practice and that sort of thing. And so I want to give you a heads up for next week's podcast, or the episode that comes out for David Hall. Watch out for that, because he's going to give a huge discount for some of his products on his website called Psych Maven. And he's got some courses that he's put up there, and don't want you to miss out on that. And I'll announce that at the beginning of that podcast. And like I said, it's probably going to be next week when that comes out. But just keep an ear out for that, because the discount that he's going to give on his courses is pretty significant, and is only going to be open for like a week. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. So keep an ear out for that. For those of you that might not have had a chance to do it yet, I've still got my free webinar, Knowing Your Numbers, same theme, just talking about money and stuff in private practice. But go over to practiceoftherapy.com/knowingyournumbers and be sure and register for the webinar. It's almost full. So, but do register anyway. And if you don't get into the webinar, you should be able to get the replay, but I'm going to work the details out about all of that. So, but go over to that URL and register for the free webinar. You can also get to it by going to the Facebook page, Practice of Therapy Facebook page, and you'll see some links there for getting registered for that webinar. And I'm just going to be talking about in that webinar and teaching you about your money mindset, about beginning to create a financial plan for your practice, and also just some other little tips and tricks around the financial side of your private practice. It's one of those things that we never really learned in graduate school. And unless you've got a business or a finance degree as an undergraduate or whatever, you're probably not going to have that background. So that's my purpose in putting this out there, so I can teach you those things, because they're so important. As as I was listening to the podcast this morning for my guest today, Paul Jarvis, he was talking with his guest just about this very thing, just about how we tend to think about money. And for some of us, there's a lot of money shame. For some of us, money, obviously money is important. It's kind of like it's a tool. And that's really all that money is. And we have to learn how to use the tool correctly. I was just thinking of a metaphor this morning. If any of you have ever done any carpentry work or used a hammer for any significant time, if you don't use that tool correctly, you're going to wear yourself out. The trick is with a hammer is to hold a hammer down near the end of the handle and not near the head of the hammer, because you can get more leverage that way. So that's just a fun fact if you've never done any carpentry or used a hammer much or anything. And that again, I was just thinking about the metaphor of tools. If you don't use your tools correctly, they're not going to be very efficient for you and not going to work right for you. But if you know how to use the tools correctly, then they can be a huge shortcut for you and just save you lots of trouble down the road. And so our money I tend to think of money in the same way. Just, it's a tool. It gets us the lifestyle we want. It gets us the things that we need in life. And so learning how to manage that in a way that's going to work for you and your practice. But anyway, I want to get to our guest, Paul, today. He's just an amazing guy and a man after my own heart, and just the way he thinks about running business. Kind of his mantra is that we shouldn't get bigger just for the sake of getting bigger, but instead learn to find the business that's the right size for us. So without further ado, here is author Paul Jarvis. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Practice of Therapy podcast. And I'm so excited to have my guest today, Paul Jarvis. And Paul has been so gracious to be on this, to set aside the time to be on the podcast. And I am just so thrilled to have him. Paul is the author of a book that you've heard me talk about several times on the podcast here, Company of One. And so he is here with us. Paul, welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Gordon. I appreciate it.
Yes. So, Paul, is usually, as I start out with most people, I guess you're not a therapist, but you're really more of a business expert, entrepreneur, and but you've got so much. The book, as I was telling you, Paul, before we started recording, was one that I just couldn't put down, and it just really spoke to me, the heart of what it means to be in business and why you'd want to be in business for yourself. But tell folks a little bit about your journey and kind of how you've landed where you are. And I know a big part of that has to do with, why you wrote the book.
Yeah, so I've been in business for 20 years for myself, which feels like a really long time. But and it was by accident as well. I never dreamed of being an entrepreneur. I never dreamed of owning a business. I was kind of on one track, and then things happen, and things change, and then you adapt if you have some resilience, and you kind of see how to fit what's happening in your life to where you kind of want to go. And so I was working I was a graphic designer at the time. I was working at an agency. I liked the work. I didn't like the company. So I was like, okay, maybe I can just go. Maybe the problem is the specific company I work for. So I'll just go find another company to work for. And so I left that job. And the day after I left, I started to get calls from the clients of that agency saying like, hey, Paul, we really like working with you more than all the rest of the people at the agency. So where are you going to go work next? And we'll bring our business with you. And I got several of these calls, and I was like, maybe I should just work. Maybe I should just work for myself. Maybe I should just work with these people directly, and then I can be in control of the relationship and the quality and all of the rest of the things. And so, yeah, that was in the 90s. That's I started then. And it's just kind of grown, I guess, as a business since then, not in terms of people, but just in terms of the work I do. So in the beginning, I was doing graphic design for websites and doing digital consulting. And now I don't do client work. I make products, things like the book Company of One, things like software, a couple courses, and I host a few podcasts as well.
Right. And I just, I hate to say it, I just discovered your podcast this morning when I was getting ready for this interview. So that's going to be added to my list. Yeah. So tell folks maybe a little bit about your concept, Company of One, and just really kind of how you landed on that and the philosophy behind it. I know that's a big question. Yeah.
It is. My favorite quote on the subject isn't even from my book. It's from Edward Abbey from 1978. So it's even before technology. And he said that growth for growth's sake is the ideology of a cancer cell, which makes it sound quite bad. Yeah. Awful. Yeah. So, but when we think about the way that business works and startups and entrepreneurialism works, we always, the current kind of paradigm in business is that, well, bigger is better. And it doesn't matter. There's no caveats to that way of thinking, is that bigger is always better. So if you have a 2-person staff versus a 1-person staff, then it's twice as good of a company, or it's twice as I think we feel, especially as entrepreneurs, we feel this pressure to become quote unquote legitimate business people, where if say we're working by ourselves from home, then we might feel like, oh, I don't have a legitimate business. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a little ridiculous, because I think there's a lot of people that run great businesses that are just one person. My business is just a 1-person business. I have a bunch of contractors that I work with, but I've never had an employee. I don't want to have employees. So the thesis of the book is that before assuming that bigger is better, we should question it. And so the book is an anti-growth. The book is just, how about we put a little bit of critical thought into what makes sense to grow and what doesn't make sense in terms of growth for a business, because sometimes what might make the most sense is not growing. Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I kind of learned in my own private practice. There are a lot of private practice owners, and some of them are very good friends of mine that have grown, pretty large practices with multiple locations. But, I think ultimately for me personally, that's not exactly what I want for myself. Part of it's age, part of it's, it's just the bandwidth. And, I don't know that it would make me any happier to have something bigger. I think that's the key, though, right? I think the key is to think about what you act, because if it's your business, if we're talking about entrepreneurs here, if it's the businesses that we own, we should be in control a little bit. Like, obviously we have to answer to our customers or clients, but we should be in control of how the business works and how the business runs. And I feel the same. I feel like I love the job that I have. I wouldn't want to promote myself out of it, where if I grew, I would have to hire people, and then I would become an administrator or a manager. And there are some people who are put on this planet to be amazing managers and administrators. I am not one of those people. And I know that myself. So I don't want to put myself in that position for the business that I am. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, when you were coming up with the concept of this thing, I'm guessing that maybe you had some life experience that really kind of pushed you more towards thinking about it in this way. I think most of my listeners that kind of know a little bit of my story, when I went into private practice, my daughter was just going into high school. My wife was having some health issues, and I really needed to free up the time in order to do those things that I really wanted to do. And then, more recently, my dad's health issues, my wife's ongoing health issues, all of those things really, for me personally,
kind of motivated me to, I don't need to grow this thing anymore, kind of thing. What has that been your experience as well, just for you and your own journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think that and this is kind of the point that I always come back to for myself, and when I'm talking to other people about it, is that I think that every business is a lifestyle business. And I think that a lot of times, especially on the internet, the term lifestyle business is this kind of bucket of the type of job that a lifestyle business is sitting on a beach with a laptop and being a digital nomad or something like that, mm-hmm. which I don't personally want to do that. I like traveling, but only a little bit. I wouldn't want to live out of a suitcase, even though I am a bit of a minimalist. But I think that every business gives you a lifestyle, right? Like if you're a corporate worker, your butt probably needs to be in a chair 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. That's typically how those kind of jobs work. If you work for like more my industry, like a high growth Silicon Valley, like venture backed business, you're working probably 16 hours a day. Mm-hmm. That's not a lifestyle I want. So, I mean, I've always wanted a business that supports my life, not a life that exists basically to support my business, because I like doing things that aren't work. Right. I like having a garden. I like going hiking. I like, if it's nice out, I live in a rainforest. If it's sunny outside on a Wednesday afternoon and my wife is around, I want to go for a bike ride with her. Right. That's just the way that I kind of set up my life and what I know that I like the most about it. And I definitely work hard at my work, but it's not like, it's probably 4 or 6 hours a day where I'm working hard, mm-hmm. getting stuff done. That feels like enough for me. It feels like I've made a dent in the things I have to do. And then I don't need to think about work. I don't want to think about work for the rest of the day. So if there's less movement, it's easier to do that if there's less moving parts, right? Like if I had a staff, then I would have to pay them. I would have to manage them in some way. If I had even an office, like I said, I work from home. This is a bedroom in my house. If I had an office, that would be quite a large expense to have to pay for. So I would need to make more money and work more. And I mean, it depends on the type of work, right? Like work like you do, you need an office like that. Mm-hmm. It makes sense. So you kind of thought about that and said, okay, well, I definitely want to have an office. So that's what I need for myself, because all my work is digital. I don't need to have somewhere to go. I also don't really want to drive somewhere. I like that my commute is from my coffee maker to a bedroom upstairs.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it's and you don't have to. You can wear your pajamas all day if you really wanted to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I only, because I do mostly video, I only need to be presentable from about the neck.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. I love that. Yeah. So the other thing you mentioned, Paul, which just really, I'm learning. I guess I'm learning how to embrace this more and more. Is just the whole idea of minimalism. And doing things in a simple way. For one thing that I've realized is that where I live, we've been in our house nearly 20 years now, and just all the crap that we've collected over the years, and realizing that I really don't need all of that stuff. And so there's a point to all this. The question maybe I have is, if someone is maybe in a practice or in a business that they're really finding that, okay, this is much too large for me. What are some good strategies to kind of minimalize and maybe bring it down from something big to something small that is just as profitable, just as fulfilling, just as all of that? It's a huge... Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest things, because I'm such a process-oriented person, I like to think about all the processes that are involved in all of the tasks, and see where they can be made more efficient or made more cost-effective, right? So there's a lot of people, especially in my industry, that pay for a lot of different software products and their software subscriptions. So you pay every single month. And I can so for example, like bookkeeping software that can get expensive. I still use a spreadsheet and it's free. And I give that to my bookkeeper who gives the data to my accountant. So I don't need to pay for all of that. I'm always looking at where I can minimize my expenses, because the less expenses I have, the sooner I hit profitability each month. So it makes it a lot easier. I think the other thing is to think about is how each of the things that you do in your business is serving both you as a business owner and your customers. So things like being able to book appointment, say for a therapy practice or counseling practice, having a scheduler, paying for that probably makes sense. It's really nice that clients can go online, pick a date and time from your calendar. Everybody I know that does any kind of work like that uses the scheduling program, and they can cost some money, but makes total sense if that makes your life easier.
Yeah, absolutely worth the investment. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's so many other things where maybe you can scale back things. Maybe there's a process that is, and I think this is where a lot of people kind of get tripped up, because people think, well, if it's simple, it's got to be easier. And it's only easier later. Right. In the beginning, working towards simplicity is hard work, because it requires critical thought and questioning all of the things that you're doing, all of the things that you have in place. Right. Mm-hmm. So it gets simple is easy later. It's not easy when you're working through it. But I think that's what people like about minimalism, or about minimalizing their business, is that once they get over that hurdle of questioning all of the things, of seeing where they can either remove things that they're paying for or that they're doing, or if they can remove steps in the process to make things just shorter, then it is worth it in the long run. But it is definitely some hard work when you're going through it.
Yeah. And yet you're just you're talking my language here, because one of the things about and I'm sure it's true for for any business, if you're not doing what produces the money for the business, which for therapists it's sitting with clients and having counseling or therapy sessions. If we're having to spend our time on all the other stuff, if you're insurance based, you'll have insurance claims to do, and, scheduling appointments, like you mentioned, and all of that, you're really cutting out on your profitability to some degree. It's my time is best spent, of course, now that I've got the practice of therapy, doing this, having interviewing people and talking to people, that's great time spent. But on the counseling side of things, if I'm not sitting in front of people doing counseling sessions, then, everything else is just fluff.
Yeah. And I think that for anybody that does any client-facing business or client-serving business, it's all of the things that you have to do outside of the work that you're doing with clients is not billable hours typically. Right. So for my business, when I was doing web design for clients, I always figured, okay, what can I do in my process to make it as streamlined and then as automated as possible? Mm-hmm. So if somebody, and this doesn't apply, but I'm sure it could apply if you think about it for the work that you and your listeners might do, is when I would be onboarding a client, when a new person would come to me, they would fill in a form, and then that would trigger something, and that would trigger something else. And then all of that was automated up to the point where we had to have a conversation, where we definitely had to have a real-time conversation. But all the steps before that to collect the information that it required was all done through an automated process, where it worked for me because I didn't have to spend hours of time doing it, but it also worked for the client because they weren't waiting on me to do the work. They could do the work when they wanted to. Mm-hmm. So if it was 3 a.m. and I was fast asleep, because I'm always asleep at 3 a.m. or 10 o'clock at night, I'm always asleep. Yeah. if it was that time and they were like, well, I want to fill in like this questionnaire, for example, they could do that on their time, and then it would move the process along for them. So I think, and that's not because I'm a tech person and a process person. I like to think about where I can automate things as much as possible while still having the human interaction. So even in that process, every email said, if you have a question or if you have a problem, just hit reply. Like, there is a person on the other end of this, even though you're moving through this in an automated way. If you need me, I'm here. But if you don't, then just keep going and get everything done. And then we'll have our conversation at the end of it.
Right. Yeah. You know, one of the things that you speak to in the book that I'm just thinking about, you know, on one side of things, there are all the automated processes in my listeners, you know, like, for lack of a better term, industry or profession is, you know, like you mentioned, scheduling, you know, intakes and that sort of thing. A lot of that can be automated through various, you know, electronic health record systems and that sort of thing. But the other side of this is just getting referrals and getting people. And that's where the big ugly M word comes in, marketing. And I know you speak to that in the book about the importance of building those relationships and that sort of thing. You want to say some more about that?
Yeah, I love marketing. It's one of my favorite things. And I think that a lot of times people who aren't in sales or marketers as their profession kind of feel a little revulsion about it. But I think it's because we're thinking about it in a way that other people do it, and that doesn't resonate with us and how we want to show up to the people who are paying attention or the people who are potentially giving us money. But marketing is really just communicating with other people. It's about building real trust with people. Like, if I send an email to my mailing list, who I've emailed every single Sunday since 2012, it's a lot of emails. And if I'm saying like, hey, everybody, I have this new product. If you'd like to check it out here. If you'd like to buy it, that would be great. If not, that's great too. It doesn't feel like I'm being a slimy, like a salesperson, right? Like, I'm just communicating, like, I've been listening to what you've been saying. I think that I have something of value. If you agree, check it out. If you don't, that's fine. I'll see you next Sunday. Like, we'll talk again week, kind of thing. And that's like, it's just interesting to me to do that. And I can do things with my audience because I've built trust with them, because I communicate with them. Somebody hits reply to a newsletter, I'm going to, I don't have an assistant, I don't have anybody working for me or robots replying to things. Somebody sends me an email from my mailing list, I'm going to see it. If they have a question, I'm going to hit reply. I'm going to build those relationships, because I think, and this is another thing that I kind of get into in the book, is that a lot of businesses, especially, and I keep relating it to tech because that's what I do, but a lot of businesses in tech focus on acquisition over retention. So they focus on, I want more new customers. I need to grow my customer base, where that's expensive and costly and difficult to just keep getting more customers. Whereas the flip side of that is thinking about, okay, well, who are the customers I already have? How can I help those people more? How can I do things for them on a more ongoing basis? How can I make it so they don't want to churn out, where they don't want to like leave or stop paying or stop coming to sessions, kind of thing? And for me, that's always more interesting and more exciting, because I like to focus on the customers I already have, because I know them. Like, I've been talking to them for years. I've been getting to know them. I know the things that they like and they don't like. I know where I can provide the most value in the expertise that I have to them. And I think if we focus on certain, and these are the people who are already paying attention. These are the people, I don't have to work hard to get their attention, because they're already paying attention to me. If I'm doing my job right, they're going to continue to pay attention to me. And so when I'm selling to them, I don't need to have There's no hard sell. It's just like, if you've read my emails, the sell is basically, hey, here's a new thing, check it out if you'd like.
Yeah.
And I make enough money to make a living off of that, because I also do things like send them emails when I don't have anything to sell. Like I said, I've sent them a weekly email for 7 years. So in approaching sales and marketing like that, where it's just relationship and trust building, that's really interesting to me. That's really exciting for me to do that. Like, I like getting to know people. I like kind of figuring out how the things that I know how to do can help people do similar or learn things. And that to me makes it really exciting to think about sales and marketing.
Right. Yeah. And it's, I know just from having started following you, you also are familiar with Pat Flynn. And by the way, I was listening to his podcast this past weekend, and he mentioned your book on one of his podcasts. So I was real excited about that. But it's that whole concept of know, like, and trust. And it's about building the relationships, and that's all, really all marketing is.
Yeah. And if you do that consistently, more than half of the people who bought one thing from me have bought multiple things from me. And it's easier to sell to somebody a second time than it is to find them and build that trust and build that relationship and sell them the first time. So I'd rather focus on the people that are already paying attention. Now, obviously, there does need to be a caveat that with, you need to build it up to a certain point. Like, you can't start out with no clients and sustain that. Like, and this is why I talked about how the book isn't anti-growth. The book is questioning growth. Because in the beginning, when you start a business, you start at zero customers, zero revenue. You need to grow. Growth 100% makes sense in that case. You need to build your business to a point where it's sustaining your life and your lifestyle. But at a certain point, we can think, okay, well, if say, for my example, if my mailing list is a size where it generates enough revenue for me to be comfortable in my life and to pay the expenses that I have, then I don't need to grow. I don't need to put energy and effort and focus into growing my list. I can put my energy, effort, and focus into serving the people who are already on it. But there is that flip, right? Where I did need to grow it at a certain point. I needed to grow it to get to that size. But at that size, I could question, okay, does growth make sense here? And it was a no. So I didn't need to put all of my effort and energy and focus into that any longer. And that could change, and I might have to at some point too. It's not as stagnant, like, okay, I've reached enough. Like, I can coast for the rest of my life. It does require constant work and nurturing and all of that.
Right. I guess the image that comes to me as you describe that is kind of the difference between vertical versus horizontal growth. I think being able to, when you get to that size, where, your income level is where you want it to be. And you're exactly right. I think it all goes back to the lifestyle you want to create for yourself, whatever that is. And if you can live at that level, what do you need to do then at that point to just sustain that and to keep that, continue to oil, get the machine well oiled and working well?
Yeah, I think that there is, and the book really argues this point better than just me talking about it, but I think there is a point where more growth can negatively affect your happiness or how you want to spend your day. Whereas in the beginning, I'm definitely happier if I make more than $0, right?
Right.
But there comes to a point where it's like, okay, well, if I can pay my mortgage and go on vacation with my wife and go for bike rides sometimes, then having to work an extra 10 hours to make an extra couple $1,000s, it's just going to make me more unhappy. I'm going to have less time to do the things I want to do. I'm probably going to be more stressed out to have to do the work. So it makes sense up until a point where it doesn't make sense. And I think our job as entrepreneurs is to check in with ourselves on that, because we can get stuck in the growth is good because it is in the beginning. So we all start out in a place where growth makes sense, growth is good, increases our happiness and everything else. And so if we never question that, we just assume, okay, this is what worked. why should I change anything? And so I think that's why we need to check in with ourselves. We need to ask questions about, okay, is this like, have I reached enough? Like, will anything change if I get more, for the better or for the worse?
Yeah. Wow. I absolutely agree with you 100%. And it's really kind of the message I've been trying to get out here lately, which was, in many ways triggered by your book. But when I came across the company of one, I had already been thinking about that. And when I ran across your book, I said, okay, this is it. This is exactly what I'm trying to capture here in just my way of thinking, and particularly for counselors and therapists, because I think one of the pain points that I hear for a lot of people is that they feel a lot of pressure to take it to the next level, so to speak. Well, what level do you want to be? Where do you want to be is the first question, and I think it comes back, like you've already said, to lifestyle. So,
I think there's just a lot of trite business advice where people say the things like, oh, bigger is better, or like, you got to level up, but they don't really think about it. It's just kind of like the thing that you say to entrepreneurs. And so I think that, and you're absolutely right. I would never take credit for this idea. And I found that so many people have thought this as well. I just wanted to put a voice to it and say, like, hey, look, everybody that kind of feels the way that you and I do and many other people do, you're not alone. Like, there's a lot of people that it's just a bad joke, but there's a growing movement of businesses that are questioning growth. Yes. And so I think that the idea that there's a lot of us out there is really good, because you're right. We do hear from, it seems like, all sides sometimes, that there is this pressure to become a more legitimate business, or to level up, or to grow. And there's a lot of people who aren't doing that, and a lot of people who are totally happy to not do that.
Right. Well, Paul, this is, golly, I could spend all day talking with you about all of this, but I want to be mindful of your time. And boy, this is great stuff. And folks, do check out, I'll have links in the show notes for all of this stuff. But Paul, tell folks how they can if they want to learn more from you and learn more about your company of one and your book. What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, it is pjrvs.com, which is my website, or just Google Paul Jarvis, and the first couple links on there. But my mailing list that we've been talking about, the Sunday Dispatches, is just at pjrvs.com.
Okay. And again, we'll have those in the show notes. Well, Paul, I thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I hope maybe I can get you back again sometime as you develop new things. And as you, I'm going to be cautious here. I'm not going to say as you grow, but we don't need to necessarily just the new stuff you come up with is just
awesome.
It would be, I think, real intriguing to most of the listeners here. So thanks again for joining me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Gordon. And thank you so much for having me on the show today. I appreciate it.
Yes. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed hearing from Paul today. I learned so much from him, and I hope you have too. And just really thinking about your mindset around your business, of really finding the right size for yourself, in that growing bigger for the sake of growing bigger is just probably not a great idea. Of really just finding the right size for you and something that supports your lifestyle. And I think that's so important to remember. And just thinking about running a private practice. If you aspire to have a huge practice, I'd say go for it. Absolutely. If that is the right size for you. But I know for a lot of people, we feel pressure to just grow things, to experience growth and make it scale things and all that sort of thing, but you don't necessarily have to. And I love the fact that Paul is thinking outside the box things. One thing I do want to mention is I apologize for I noticed in the recording that there was some echo there, and I must have had a speaker on in the background and not aware of it, because normally when I record, I wear earbuds so that I can hear the person and it doesn't create that echo. But obviously I must have had a speaker on in the background, and I do apologize for that. Tried to filter it out some, but just one of those technical glitches, and it is what it is. That's the fun of this. So, but anyway, do check out Paul's book. The link there to The Company of One. I would really encourage you to read his book. It's just a wonderful book. And check out his podcast too. And the net title of it is Of One. His podcast is, like he said, is the things that he's adding to or has thought about after he wrote the book. And he's just a delight to listen to. So I recommend that resource to you. Also, be sure to check out today's sponsor, Brighter Vision. They make beautiful websites, but not only that, they help you with your search engine optimization. And if you go over to brightervision.com/Gordon, you can get 1 month free. And you might check out what else is going on with them. I think they've got a big sale going on right now, depending on when you listen to it. So I think that's something to check into. I saw that on Facebook today. So, but check out Brighter Vision. They're wonderful people. They make beautiful websites, and they absolutely know what they're doing. And also be sure to tune in next week or here soon for my interview with Dr. David Hall. My good friend David and I are doing some collaboration, and he's got his website up, Psych Maven, and we were talking in that episode, we talk about doing continuing education and diversifying your practice and all kinds of fun stuff. So keep that on your radar because he's going to be having a sale of sorts that's going to be for a very limited time, and you want to be able to hit that window and find out about it by listening to the podcast. So, well, take care, folks. Again, thanks for tuning in to the Practice of Therapy podcast. Do take the time to subscribe wherever you might be listening to the podcast. And thank you for joining me and letting me into your ears and into your life and being part of your journey. I love getting emails from you. Just so shoot me an email. Check us out on Instagram. It's TOP Podcast. TPOT podcast, and that's the handle on Instagram, and then we've got our Facebook page, and then I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter, wherever you might be, and so love to engage with you there. So take care, folks. Have a good rest of your week or weekend, and this is coming out right before the 4th of July, so happy Independence Day. Take care, folks. Been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.